In the play King Lear, we see two self-ignorant, clueless fathers bringing tremendous harm to themselves, to their families, to their society. One of these fathers is King Lear, and so the play obviously is named after this character, King Lear. And very early in the play, King Lear tells his daughters that he wants to retire in peace and that he's going to divide his kingdom up among his three daughters. But before he does that, he needs his daughters to tell him how much they love him. Goneril and Regan, his two daughters, come up with all sorts of amazing nonsense about they love Lear more than air, they love Lear more than eyesight, they love Lear more than space, liberty, etc. Cordelia, she's unable to play this game. As Cordelia says, she cannot heave her heart into her mouth. Lear, who claims to love Cordelia, becomes enraged and effectively exiles Cordelia, and she gets nothing of the kingdom. After that whole situation sort of calms down and most people leave the scene, Regan and Goneril are talking with each other, and Regan says of her father that he hath ever but slenderly known himself. They do indicate that in, late in life now, I mean, Lear is about 80 years old, that he seems to be slipping a little bit mentally. But Regan says, yeah, maybe it's true, Dad is slipping a little bit mentally, but he hath ever but slenderly known himself. In other words, Dad has always been kind of a self-ignorant person. I mean, think about what we just experienced, where Lear, the king, asked Cordelia to put on a display, to tell Lear and to announce to the others in the room how much she loves Lear. And what she gets in the kingdom is related to that, is based on that, based on her performance. But Lear clearly did not know that Cordelia was incapable of playing such a game, that her personality, her way of being would not allow her to do that. How is it possible that Lear was so ignorant of his daughters, not only Cordelia, but how is it that he was so ignorant of the characters of Goneril and Regan? They knew him. They knew how to play him. Goneril and Regan knew how to play him. Lear did not know his own daughter, so Lear seems to be in a state of pretty significant ignorance of his own daughters, but also ignorance of himself. This is a tremendous problem. We can see how other people bring trouble on themselves. That's fairly easy to see much of the time. It's a lot harder to see how we bring trouble on ourselves, in part because of self-ignorance. Lear says to Cordelia, after Cordelia refuses to play this game, he says, better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better. Completely unaware that Cordelia actually is the one of the three daughters who really does love him. Here we're looking at a man who clearly is self-absorbed, is self-obsessed, profoundly unwise. I mean, he himself will acknowledge later in the play that he is foolish. Lear is tremendously self-ignorant, and that seems to be part of a general ignorance, that this guy just doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't see how he's bringing tremendous trouble on himself, on his family, on his kingdom. He's just in a state of ignorance about this. As the play goes on, And Lear begins to see, really what Regan and Goneril are doing is they conspire against him. They show a complete lack of gratitude for, the parts of Lear's kingdom that they have received. Lear begins to see how awful Regan and Goneril are. And then there is some insight that Lear does recognize that he did Cordelia wrong. I think unlike another character in the play, Gloucester, another clueless father, unlike Gloucester, it's not clear to me that Gloucester ever really gets it. I do think that Lear gets it. And here we have some insight fairly early into the play where Lear acknowledges, I did Cordelia wrong. And then when we get to the end of the play, close to the end of the play, Lear says to Cordelia and to those standing around, he refers to himself as a very foolish, fond old man, foolish, unwise, unperceptive, self-ignorant. He says, you must bear with me. Pray you now, forget and forgive. I am old and foolish. Lear gets it, but unfortunately, it's too late. Unfortunately, the consequences of the decisions he made, along with the consequences of decisions other people made, all of this is unfolding now, and it's too late to do anything about it. But we go back and say, well, what started this tremendous disaster that unfolds in the play? And what started it was Lear's profound state of ignorance. Ignorance of himself, ignorance of his family, ignorance of how this demand he made on his daughter, ignorance of how that would affect his daughters. Lear does see it, but it's too late. And so, Regan, I think, gets it right, that Dad has ever but slenderly known himself. This is a man who lives in a state of self-ignorance. And that self-ignorance is related to a broader ignorance about the impact I'm having on other people. Ignorance of those close to me. It seems to me we're looking at a man who has been so tremendously self-absorbed, but curiously, in a self-ignorant way. Self-absorbed and yet self-ignorant. And what we see in the play are some of the, extreme consequences that come, from this particular case. The lesson to think about here, the thing to think about here is the extent to which we are self-ignorant, and it's easy to see problems in other people. It's easy to see mistakes other people make. It's much more difficult to see the mistakes we make. It's much more difficult to be self-critical, not self-hating, not self-loathing, but self-critical for the purpose of acquiring self-knowledge. And the more self-knowledge we have, then the less likely it is that we'll bring unnecessary trouble on ourselves, which comes about as a result, in a lot of cases, of self-ignorance.